Namaste.
Namaste. Why is it what you laugh?
Just a few seconds ago you were saying you were cold. Or comfortable. Comfortable.
Yes, comfortable I was, and then I drank the coffee. Anyway.
So, one way to understand these stories about the birth of Jesus is to remember that in a certain way, politics to some extent, but public record keeping in the time of Jesus was very much libertarian. There wasn't any. And so, if you want, in fact, genealogy.com, that's why genealogy.com doesn't go back to the time of Christ. Because there was no public record keeping. When you were born in biblical times, you didn't get a birth certificate. Because you didn't go to the hospital. Because there weren't any hospitals. Odds are, mom squats in a field and
There you are.
there you are.
Poor mom.
So geez, poor mom, yeah. Well, let's see, let's think of the time she saved. There probably was managed health care. So Jesus, appears on the scene. He's around 30 years old, does his shtick, gets crucified, resurrected. People start to ask themselves, I wonder where he came from. And so they couldn't just run down to City Hall, because there wasn't a City Hall, because the libertarians were in charge, and they were busy trying to figure out where Aleppo is.
Yeah.
So what they did was they searched the scriptures. Because the scriptures, the Old Testament, our Old Testament, had predictions about when the Messiah would come. And qualities the Messiah would have. And so they went back through there, and the last thing written in the Gospels that contain one, and all the Gospels contain a birth narrative, was the birth narrative. And if you look at those stories historically, you're going to be disappointed. And I'd rather disappoint you today than disappoint you next Sunday on Christmas Day. A lot of the details in those stories never happened. There was no census. There was no slaughter of the innocent. There were no flights into Egypt because they hadn't invented airplanes yet. You ever heard that joke about the Sunday school class? Where the kids, first grade Sunday school class, the kids are asked to draw a picture depicting their favorite Bible story, and one kid draws a picture of an airplane, and the teacher says, "What is that?" The kid says, "Flight into Egypt." So, if there was none of that, you're left with a couple of choices. You can throw it all out and say, well, or you can understand mythology and try and get underneath what they're trying to tell you. The thing is, Isaiah wasn't writing about Jesus. Isaiah was writing about Cyrus, the king of Persia, who allowed the Jewish people to return to their homeland after their exile, 6th century BCE. But it's not insignificant, even if we know that some of those qualities are qualities that these people saw in Jesus. They saw Jesus as a kind of deliverer, as one who returned them in some ways to their roots, as one who in some ways ended their imprisonment and their exile from their spiritual roots at the very least. They had expected, as they plowed through their scriptures and looked for what this Messiah would be, they had expected a military Messiah. And that led to a lot of misunderstandings. They expected a powerful Messiah. And interestingly, the way, when it turned out not to be that way, that the gospel writers resolved that was to go back to Isaiah and to go back through other parts of the Old Testament and pick up this notion of what it was to be a servant, even a suffering servant, to be someone who brought peace. And, you know, it seems like it's something that's really different from what we do today, but it's not. It's subtly different. But what do you see going on whenever somebody stands up and says, well, actually it happens more often when somebody gets in trouble. So you have a spiritual or religious leader who gets in trouble. People go back to the scriptures of that tradition to try and evaluate the behavior of this person to see whether the things they did were okay or not. When we want to evaluate a religious movement, we go back to the scriptures of the tradition it started in to see how the values of the movement correspond to the values that are in those scriptures. When we look at what's preached about in the average church, or more importantly, what's left out, we learn a lot about the values of that organization. And it's interesting that we love to focus on what I call nipples to knees theology, which says that the only things that matter are things that happen somewhere between your nipples and your knees. And the problem is, at the very least, that leaves out most of what people do that harms somebody else. There's very few things you can do between your nipples and your knees that harm somebody else. There's a few. But you don't lie there, at least not in the sense of say a false, of speak a falsehood. You don't have ill motivation there. You don't cheat somebody. And I suppose you could argue, but for the most part, you don't cheat somebody between your nipples and your knees. You don't steal anything there. You don't devalue someone else. Well,
It's a slippery slope right there.
I know, it's a slippery slope. You can disappoint someone. Oh, yay. But the things we do that are life-denying, 99% of them occur right up here. And that the thoughts get translated into actions. And so, as we look at those, the birth narratives and the stories around Jesus' earliest life, they're trying to say who he is. They're not trying to say what he did. And we get particularly hung up on this notion of the virgin birth, which, as we've said before, was a common narrative in the time. You couldn't swing a dead cat in biblical times without hitting a couple people who'd been born of a virgin. And the Buddha, 500 years before, had done one better and done a cross between a Sigourney Weaver, an alien, and a virgin birth, and just shot out from between his mother's ribs. Which seems to me a lot more inconvenient than a virgin birth. But, so we, in our context of nipples to knees theology, look at that and say, oh, this is telling us a lot about our fixation, which are I'm going to call it misbehavior and not sins, misbehaviors that occur nipples to knees. And that wasn't what they were trying to say about Jesus at all. And the earliest church that took their patriarchy and ran with it and started to say that, well, since Mary was a virgin, if women are going to be holy, they're going to have to be virgins. And it became a really convenient way to repress people. Now, as I once explained, I see you shaking your head. So I once explained to a gay...
Explaining it didn't work.
Well, and I once explained to a gay friend of mine that those of us who aren't gay males are a little ambivalent about the whole virgin thing, but that's a story for another time. So, who was Jesus that they tried to find a way to describe him that fit in with their expectations of Messiah. He was somebody who did the things that today we find most inconvenient. He included the outsider. He talked to the people he wasn't supposed to talk to, especially those women, even the ones who weren't virgins, even the ones who weren't pure in a religious understanding of purity that prevailed at the time. He talked to foreigners. He talked to people who were racially impure. He talked to people who violated the nipples to knees expectations of his society. The party people, the prostitutes, notorious sinners, because if you're going to hang out with somebody, you should probably hang out with somebody that's good at what they do. And the tax collectors, who were even worse than the IRS because they worked on commission. And so he hung out with everybody who, had there been a presidential campaign in his day, politicians would have decried. But contemporarily, it's not very comfortable to talk about that part. It's not very comfortable to talk about the fact that Jesus hung out with the very people we're hoping to exclude from our neighborhood. It's not very comfortable to talk about the fact that Jesus probably wouldn't hold a gated community in much esteem. It's not very comfortable to talk about the fact that Jesus would, from the evidence, want to dismantle all patterns of inequality in our society, as he did in his. So we become very selective, some of us, and focus on this narrow thing that nobody can see us, for the most part, doing anyway, unless you're an exhibitionist. But I mean, if I get all fixated on who loves who, who's sleeping with who, who's doing what in their bedroom, I'm pretty safe, because as long as I remember to draw my curtains, I'm immune to criticism. And I never have to look at the things that I do that fall into those things I'd rather not have pastor talk about on Sunday. Fall into those passages we'd rather not preach about. You know, I'd much rather talk about the Ten Commandments than the Sermon on the Mount, because I can probably make a case that I don't violate any of the Ten Commandments, but I sure can't make a case that I live by the Sermon on the Mount. And so we have this narrowing of the tradition. And I want to say that the people who get all fixated on what's historical and what isn't are doing the same thing, just in a little different direction. They're avoiding the point. After all, mythology, in the best sense of the word, are stories that are true, and they might have happened that way. But they're no less true if we get a couple details wrong. We look across the street and see our neighbor mowing the lawn, and we're not quite sure if he has a mower from Sears or a Toro or, I don't know what the other brands are, John Deere or a generic mower. And we tell somebody that our neighbor mowed the lawn with a Toro, and we're wrong about the fact that it was a Toro. Is the grass not still cut? Of course it is. The Bible was never meant to be used as a proof text. And it doesn't matter whether there ever was a massacre of the innocents or slaughter of the innocents, because certainly enough innocent people were killed by the oppressive regime that occupied Israel at that time. So it's still a true story, even if it didn't happen that way. Jesus fulfilled some of the expectations that they had of who a Messiah would be, but more importantly, they saw in Jesus who they thought the Messiah would be, and they saw more clearly in Jesus who God would be. And there's nothing about any healthy understanding of God that's fixated in the place most contemporary religion is fixated. So our job is to find a way to hold the story loosely, to not get hung up on whatever details might strike us the wrong way or make us a little uncomfortable. And resist the temptation to look at the easy parts of it. And instead, concentrate on looking at the parts that cause us a little bit of discomfort, or a lot of bit of discomfort. The parts that hit home because we see ourselves in them, not as the good guy who never does that, but as the real, live, imperfect, yet perfect human being who struggles just like every other human being does to live up to who this Jesus was, which was someone who found a way to bring people in rather than push them out. Amen.
So 2 points of commentary.
Go ahead.
First, I haven't been able to verify, but just plus